After the completion of inaugural function, I once again welcomes all the guest of honors and participants for this today national level seminar jointly organized by Sri Sant Gajanan Mahavidyalaya Kharda, Taluka Jamkhed, District Ahmednagar, and Tuljaram Chaturchand Arts, Science and Commerce College, Baramati, District Pune. Before moving forward, I would like to introduce the resource person for the first session of first day of the uh, national level seminar. The resource person we got is Dr. Sharad Gore sir, Professor of Statistics in SPPU from 2001 to 2014, Head of Department of Statistics from 2009 to 2012, SPPU Pune, Head Department of Computer Science 2001 to 2004, SPPU Pune, Professor and Head MCA Department, Bharati Vidyapeeth, IMED Pune, as well as he has been served as a visiting faculty, Department of Statistics, Pennsylvania State University, USA, from 1990 to 93. He has had the specialization in statistical computing, environmental statistics, multivariate statistics, sampling theory, optimization techniques, artificial intelligence, soft computing, machine learning, data science, data mining, natural language processing, business intelligence, and business analytics, etc. His research publications as of June 30, 2018 are 78. He has participated more than 100 conferences. He has been the coordinator of refresher courses and has participated as a resource person in more than 100 refresher courses. As a research guide, he has been guided in statistics, computer science, environmental sciences, and as of now, 17 students of his have been awarded PhD, and two students have submitted their thesis. Apart from his academic and research output, he has also worked in extracurricular activities such as academic advisor, Sama Technologies, M&A Biba Company, academic advisor, KEM Hospital Research Center Pune, academic advisor, Mashhad University of Medical Sciences, Mashhad, Iran. This is the short biographical output. We can say here that Sharad Gore sir has. Before wasting too much time, may I request Dr. Sharad Gore sir to give his speech. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, sir. Go ahead. Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I'm very grateful to the organizers both the Gajanan Maharaj College, Kharda, and TC College, Baramati, for inviting me for this national level seminar. What I find is more and more college teachers are going to get into research activities. One reason is if somebody wants to get a teaching job in a university, as of today, PhD is a compulsory qualification to get a job in a university. Even among college teachers, if we want promotion to be associate professor, then PhD is a necessary qualification. And even what I find now, gradually, UGC is recommending that even PG teachers, postgraduate students also should publish at least one research paper during their postgraduate course. So gradually, research is becoming a core activity. And therefore, it is important to understand the methodology that is required in research. If we, for example, very often we hear stories of Madame Marie Curie, that accidentally she found radium. Now everybody is not so lucky that accidentally we find something and get credit. Research is a methodological process where we have to put hard work, we have to be very consistent, continuity, and say tremendous efforts with proper direction and with proper steps. So I would like to talk on research methodology. So I'll talk more general today, and my next talk will be more on the focus area of data collection and so on. So I'll begin my presentation. So is the screen visible?
Yes, sir. PowerPoint is
Yeah.
displaying. Yes,
Oh
sir.
yes, thank you. So I will talk on research methodology. So introduction to research. So let us first understand what is made by research. So all of us are aware of research, but we do not have a good understanding of what research really is, why research is necessary, why research is important, and what outcomes are possible from research. Very often we feel that the PhD degree is the only outcome of research. But we should understand that research does not only change our degree, but also changes our personality. Research makes us more hardworking, more capable, more knowledgeable, and also more skilled. So in research, something that only very few, is research something that only very few can conduct, because very often there is a question that only very intelligent people can go in research. Second question that we very often ask is, does research require very high level of intelligence? Third question is, does research involve hard work, sleepless nights, and endless pursuit? Very often we meet somebody who is pursuing a PhD, and very often we see such a person frustrated saying that, oh, so many years and I still have not got my degree and so on. So that is a bad picture, but reality is they are enjoying research and therefore they are pursuing the degree. So these and many similar questions keep most of us away from research. Now, what is the difference between different activities that have to be conducted on our own? So for example, during our regular studies, degree courses, PG courses, we have many exercises. Then later on, we also get involved in projects. So what we have to remember is research is different from exercises and projects. Why? Because exercises are confirming knowledge already acquired. That's why at the end of most of the chapters in textbooks, there are exercises. So we have learned a rule. We want to apply the rule to a given situation. That is an exercise. Projects go beyond exercises because problems are for solving real life problems. So projects are for solving real life problems. So there is one situation which is complicated. Therefore, it is not as simple as an exercise. A project takes maybe 2 or 3 months. So every student in the last year of their degree or postgraduate degree, are now required to complete a project, so that their involvement, their understanding, their depth, all of these gets tested in a project. But still project does not involve independent work. Research is for finding something new, either theoretically or application wise. And therefore research requires independent work, independent thinking, and their own contribution. So research must result in a substantive contribution to the domain of study. The second aspect is research will have to contribute. For example, if I carry out research in social sciences, then I should add some make some contribution to social sciences, either in terms of understanding of the social behavior or understanding of social problems and their remedies and so on. Similarly, research should make the researcher more knowledgeable, and this knowledge should go beyond being able to read, remember, and recall. So these are the three qualities usually we attach. When I read the definition of learning in the B.Ed syllabus, these three words are there. Students should be able to read, remember, and recall. That is learning. Research requires something more, creating. And therefore that creative activity involved in research gives the pleasure to the researcher. Second part is, what is the meaning of research? So research is a search for new knowledge. Now, what is the knowledge? So knowledge can be either in the form of facts, that is data, or a method of analysis, that is algorithms, way of interpreting results, that is drawing inference, or using known methods to solving new problems, that is applications. So in applications, usually methods are known, but the problems that we solve are new. Research is defined in some standard dictionaries as follows. So it is useful to get some definitions, so we can fix where our research requirement goes. So Oxford English Dictionary defines research as the systematic investigation into and study of materials and sources in order to establish facts and reach new conclusions. So what this dictionary says is that the conclusions from the same facts can be new. Why? Because we think of the or look at the facts in a different aspect, from a different perspective. Cambridge English Dictionary says a detailed study of a subject, especially in order to discover new information or reach a new understanding. Now, what is happening? The interpretation of conclusion or understanding. So understanding is what I have in my mind, conclusion is what I can declare. So these are equivalent words. Merriam-Webster dictionary says it's an investigation or experimentation aimed at the discovery and interpretation of facts, revision of accepted theories or laws in the light of new facts, or practical application of such new or revised theories or laws. So this tries to become more comprehensive, try to cover more areas of research. Dictionary.com is a popular website. It says diligent and systematic inquiry or investigation into a subject in order to discover or revise facts, theories, applications, etc. So there has to be something new, there has to be a contribution. Finally, Collins Dictionary says research is work that involves studying something and trying to discover facts about it. So this studying something, now we have been always studying something, but research requires a depth, more go deeper into the study and try to understand more. Very often we use the terms like discovery and finding when something usually unexpected comes to light. When something comes to, what comes to light need not be unknown, but it is usually not noticed, explained, or understood. Research goes beyond discovery. Why? Because discovery usually is accidental, while research is purposeful. What we learn from experience is discovery but what we experience in order to learn is research. That is, in research we first decide the objective that we want to learn and then try to experience so that that learning gets confirmed. In short, research is a search for new knowledge. This brings us to the next question. The question is, what is knowledge? So before we try to understand what is knowledge, it is necessary to think of three words. these three words are used in statistics and management very commonly: data, information, and knowledge. Several research articles use these three words as if they have the same meaning. I read many research articles where they say we observe knowledge, we find knowledge, we discover knowledge, and therefore it is important to understand the difference between the three. So in reality, these three words are not only different, but there is an order of significance between them. So the most bottom area is data. Data is at the bottom of every thing that we try to understand. So data is what we acquire either through observations or through questionnaires, that is asking people. These two are primary data sources, or from published work. I read some research paper, so I know what somebody else has known. So for me, that is secondary data. So this is data. Now data are collection of facts and therefore meaningless in themselves. Data must be processed and information must be extracted from data. So there is a relationship between data and information. So what is information? Information cannot be observed directly, but has to be extracted from data. Information is what makes sense from data. Data is meaningless in itself, but when we extract information, we get some sense out of the data. So it is obvious that data is usually large in volume, but information is concise and small in volume. And therefore it is easy to represent or present information that we get from data. As a result, it is easier to present information obtained from data instead of presenting the data, which is often called raw data. So for example, after the board results are out, people are not interested in every student's marks. That will be data. What is information? The first question people ask, okay, what is the percentage of the topper? Which school is the topper from? Or which college is the topper from? Now this is concise information extracted from data. Why? Because information is used for answering a question. So when there is a question, we will extract relevant information from data. Data may have more information than what we require. And therefore, there is also a principle known as the principle of sufficiency. We will extract information as long as it is required. As soon as we have sufficient information, we may not process the data more. And therefore, the future scope for somebody else is to look into the same data and try to get some more information, because they may have different questions. So the quantity used to express a characteristic is usually called a parameter. Now this parameter is usually understood as a characteristic for the entire possible data. Therefore, the interest is in finding the value of an unknown parameter using data. Data means sample observations. And this will bring us to the aspect of what we observe and what we try to understand. So we cannot observe everything that we want to understand, but we observe only a part of it, that is called a sample, but we try to understand the entirety, the population. The third level is knowledge. Knowledge is at a higher level than information. Why? Because knowledge can neither be acquired, that is observed directly, obtained directly like data, nor it can be extracted from raw data like information. Knowledge has to be developed over time through experience of extracting information from data. So now data and information is a couple. We get information, extract information from data. After repeating such exercises, we get some idea about what is the possible information that we can get from a particular type of data. So that is knowledge. So data and information are concrete, whereas knowledge is abstract. And therefore knowledge is very difficult to express, difficult to describe. But those who get the knowledge, they understand that, oh yes, we have gone beyond data and information, now we have some knowledge. So even though data and extracted information are numerical, knowledge is not numerical. Data and information are presented in numerical, tabular or graphical form, whereas knowledge has to be expressed verbally. For example, when people work in the socio-economic area, so there is a question of poverty line. So some data is collected, some information is extracted. Finally, what is the knowledge that we get? We get the idea about where is the poverty line. So those people who have an income below the poverty line are defined as poor people. Those who have income above the poverty line. So this is knowledge. So let us recap again. So data is a collection of facts, information is its meaning, and knowledge is the understanding of data and information that it contains. So knowledge is useful in taking decisions. So information is for every question. In order to answer the question, we have to extract information. So for every question, there is some information, whereas knowledge is useful in taking decisions. So one popular example in decision theory is play tennis. So the player looks at the looks outside to the sky. So is the sky sunny, rainy, or cloudy? Looks at the wind, looks at the temperature, looks at the humidity, and decides. So that knowledge about when to play and when not to play allows him to, or the player to take the decision. So knowledge is useful in taking decisions, and therefore knowledge is one of the objectives of research, because at the end of the research, the researcher should be able to develop a decision rule, when to do what. So understanding of a phenomenon is essential for an effective application. So unless I understand the phenomenon, application is practically a decision. Now let us go to types of research. There are two major types of research: exploratory and explanatory or confirmatory. So exploratory research begins without any assumption or knowledge about what to expect from data. So that is why the word exploration is used. So we have some new situation, we observe data and we try to find out, are there any particular say noticeable patterns in the data, so that we understand or we can expect something in a similar situation. On the other hand, explanatory data begins with a hypothesis and attempts to either confirm it or refute the hypothesis. And very often I have read some books on research methodology. They typically talk of this research, and therefore they say that most of the research problems have to begin with a hypothesis. Now this happens more often in natural sciences, because natural sciences have a deductive thinking. That is, there is some universal rule and I want to verify whether that rule applies in a given situation. So from the universal to the specific is the deductive logic. On the other hand, exploratory research goes in the inductive way. That is what I observe in my experiment. I expect that the same thing will happen everywhere. So from the local to the global is induction, from the global to the local is deduction. Different authors have described different types of research. So in addition to these two types, there are different classifications of research by different authors. What most of them have ignored is the fact that research can be classified in different ways according to different approaches. So what I consider important for classifying my research decides what is the class of my research, what is the type of my research. So let us look at these classifications little brief in detail, so that we can understand where we are going to work, in what type of research we will be pursuing. So research can be classified in different ways according to different components of research. Some important classifications are as follows. According to the method of data collection. So one classification can be decided according to the method or the way by which we collect data. And there are two classes. One is empirical and other is experimental. Empirical research is based on observing what already exists. That is, empirical research does not create or generate new data. It only observes what is already there. Examples are social surveys, socioeconomic surveys, forest surveys, and so on. They are examples of empirical research. Empirical research is based on the assumption that the process of data collection or making observations does not affect observations themselves. So that our observational process is not intruding, it does not affect what we are interested in, and therefore harmless observations can tell us what is happening in the field. On the other hand, experimental research is based on observing data that is generated by the research through an experiment. So experimental research is more focused because we can create conditions that we are interested in and then we observe the effect. So experimental research can very often lead to a cause and effect relationship, whereas empirical research will lead only to an association. There can be strong association between two quantities, but we cannot claim a cause and effect relationship because what we are observing is happening. Whereas in experimental research, what we are observing is made to happen. And therefore, experimental research can involve laboratory experiments or field experiments. Nowadays, clinical trials is a very popular topic. Now it is one step, it is also part of experimental research. And therefore, clinical trials are required in order to develop new medicines because we have to create conditions that we are interested in and then we observe effectiveness of the new medicines and so on. So experimental research is more important in natural sciences because it is possible to create situations. Empirical research is more popular in social sciences, humanities and management, commerce, because in those situations we cannot create artificial conditions and observe the consequences. So it is obvious that the stronger the quality of the research is as strong. The quality of research is strong as the experimental research. So empirical research is not as strong because there are some things that we cannot control and therefore we cannot predict or specify the relationship. Another type of classification is according to the desired outcome of research. What do I want from my research? So there are four typical classes. One is descriptive, second is inferential, third is diagnostic, and fourth is predictive. So what is descriptive research? It has the purpose of understanding the specified phenomenon. The result of such research is a status report. So descriptive research is the first step of exploration, try to understand what is happening. For example, when say the police department is interested in knowing what is the situation of crimes, their first project or first activity is to find out how many rapes are happening, how many burglaries are happening, how many different attacks, social problems. So all the different crimes are described, counted, described. Then second is inferential. That is, it is not even to only enough to describe what is happening, but try to draw inference from that. That is, if I observe something in one town, can I say that the similar thing may be happening in other towns? So inference is going beyond descriptive statistics and try to aim at drawing inference about the unknown population parameters. This research goes beyond the observed data and makes statements about the entire population without observing the complete population. And this is where the inferential methodology involves some inductive logic. What we observe is a sample, but what we understand is the population. So inferential research is the beginning of statistical research. Descriptive statistics still is in say arithmetic and graphical methods, tabular methods, and so on, presentation. The third is diagnostic research. So inference is only about what is likely to happen in the entire population. Now in diagnosis, we have to try to find out the reasons why it is happening. So diagnostic research goes beyond drawing inference and attempts to interpret the estimated population parameter. Diagnostic research attempts to establish cause and effect relationships among observed variables. So the standard example is obviously medicine, because the word diagnosis is common in medical practice. So if a patient goes to the doctor, now patient knows the pain, patient knows where it is paining, but the doctor can diagnose the disease in the sense that the doctor can find out the reason why there is a pain. So diagnostic research is similar, because unless I diagnose a problem, I cannot find the remedy to the problem. And therefore diagnostic research is also very important, especially in new phenomena. When a condition changes, the effects change, and therefore diagnosis is necessary. But again, there is one objection that, okay, I know what is happening, why it is happening, but the question is, so what? And therefore predictive research is the next step. Knowing what is happening, why it is happening, can it help me? What is likely to happen next? So predictive research goes beyond establishing relationships between variables and attempts to predict the possible response when the values of the causal or predictor variables are specified. For example, during the rainy season, there is always a question: if it rains in October, what will be the effect on the crop yield? So it's a predictive problem, and therefore predictive research, it goes beyond inference and tries to predict before something is observed or before we can wait in order for that to happen. And therefore predictive research has importance, or is more important in areas where experimentals can be costly, can be destructive. Therefore people may not be able to or may not be willing to experiment, but still try to predict. Another classification is according to the nature of data. So in some books of on research methodology, this is highlighted: qualitative and quantitative. Unfortunately, some books describe these as qualitative research and quantitative research. According to my understanding, qualitative research is typically research on qualitative data, and quantitative research is research on quantitative data. And there can be some methods which are non-numeric, so they are called qualitative. So qualitative research involves non-numerical data such as opinion, preference, level of agreement or disagreement, and so on. So observations in qualitative data are categorical, either nominal or ordinal. We'll look at these nominal, ordinal at a later stage. On the other hand, quantitative research involves numerical or quantifiable variables. Observations in quantitative variables are obtained by counting or by measurement, and therefore we represent quantitative data in the form of numbers. We represent qualitative data in form of labels. They are called labels or names. And sometimes we also use the word code to represent qualitative data. Research is often associated with the nature of data, and therefore we have the classification of qualitative research and quantitative research. Finally, some people classify research in two categories: conceptual or theoretical research on one side and applied research on the other side. So conceptual research is not very common but has high academic value. Nobel Prizes in economics are mostly awarded to researchers who have developed or propagated some economic theory. So in India, we know at least two Indians who have been awarded with Nobel Prize. Both of them proposed some new economic theories, and they were rewarded. Now we have to understand that theories may not be applied and may not be experimented, but there is some logical reasoning. So conceptual research is very difficult. Conceptual research is difficult because it involves logical arguments rather than evidence based on observations. On the other hand, applied research, which is more common, it has more practical value. Nobel Prizes in natural sciences and medicine are awarded mostly to researchers who have carried out applied research. Applied research is relatively easy in the sense that we can easily conduct experiments, we can collect data, and we can try to analyze the data. But it is restricted by the assumptions and conditions under which it is carried out. So if I say carry out some experiment, conduct an experiment and collect data and analyze, then I also have to report the conditions under which the experiment was conducted, so that my understanding is limited to only those conditions. So as assumptions or conditions change, there is the need for research in order to understand the consequences of those changes. And therefore there is no end to applied research, because as conditions change, somebody has to carry out research, find out what happens under these new conditions, and so on. Now, next is motivation and purpose. Because getting promotion, getting a job, and so on, these are not really the promotions for research. They may be the motivations for getting the degree. But research means the activity. So every research activity must be motivated by some ultimate target. Natural science research, for example, is usually motivated by the desire to understand some specific laws of nature. For example, in physics, the Newtonian laws are there. Einstein developed relativity theory, and still people are conducting experiments to understand maybe behavior of some material and so on. So what are the laws of nature? How do they apply? And what is the use? So are there any particular applications? So motivation is necessary for a researcher because there is no other reason why the researcher should go through the rigorous and treacherous process of research. So if the researcher is not motivated, then the researcher feels tired, feels unhappy, and therefore begins of thinking of abandoning the research. But if a researcher is motivated, they know why they are doing it, so they go through that process. The purpose of research is an imaginary goal that the researcher has in mind. Because when we begin the research, that goal is not concrete, that is not even visible. It has to be imagined. If the purpose of research is not clear, then research is not likely to be satisfactory. So I will get satisfaction only when I know what I want, and I will be happy when I reach there. So it is like a travel. When we begin the traveling, we don't see the end point, but we know where it is, in what direction it is, and how long it may take, and so on. So research is something like that. It is necessary for every researcher to explicitly state the purpose of research so that other details about the undertaken research can be stated clearly. So the beginning of the research is to first make the statement about the motivation purpose. Why am I doing this research? Now we should understand the purpose is different from objectives, because objectives are achievable endpoints, whereas purpose is a hidden, unknown reason. Why am I carrying out research activity? So objectives of research. Now these are now concrete steps, because in every research proposal, it is necessary to state the objectives of research. So there can be many objectives. It is not necessary, or even it is not enough to have a research degree for one objective. So every research carried out a research degree will have multiple objectives. So every research activity must have a set of clearly stated, achievable objectives. A research activity can have multiple objectives, and these must be stated clearly in the beginning of the proposal. So the proposal begins with objectives. Some precaution is necessary in stating objectives of research. It is important to keep in mind the inductive logic that justifies research. So what I observe is always on a small population or small sample, but what I want to draw inference on is the entire population. So inductive logic is as follows. What is observed during research is not restricted only to time and location. The same, or at least a similar result will be obtained in general if the same method is applied to data collected at other times or other places. So generalization is the basic understanding of, or the basic implication of induction. So whatever I observe, can I generalize it? If I cannot generalize it, then my research has no value. But if I can generalize it, then there is something for people to learn from it, and without experimenting or without experiencing, they know what to expect, or they know what to do. So principle of induction is what happens on a part also happens on the whole. Motivation and purpose of research continued. Every research activity must be motivated by some ultimate target. Sorry. Only theoretical research is deductive. That is, theoretical research begins with a universal rule and verifies whether it holds in the data observed by the researcher. Most of us get involved in research that is subject to inductive logic. Therefore, we shall not discuss deductive research much, concentrate only on inductive research. The principle of induction is also called the principle of evidential support. What happens to the observed is claimed to happen to the unobserved. So without observing something, I can make a claim from here that this is going to happen or this is likely to happen. This is also called the principle of generalization. So the more generalizable research is or research findings are, more value to that research is. For example, today in the COVID situation, some epidemiologists are making some claims. On what basis are they making claims? Because COVID is a new virus. So what they say is what they have observed in epidemics of other natures due to other viruses is more likely or most likely to happen in the COVID case also. So they are trying to generalize from the observed situations to unobserved situations. So that is a logic called generalization or induction. Objectives of research must be listed in a systematic way, from simpler to more complex. So if I begin with the most complex objective in the beginning, the other objectives will look very simple. So we should begin from the simple easy to achieve objective, then more difficult, more complicated. That is one possibility. Second possibility, that among objectives there can be some natural hierarchy. I'll first do this. When I know this, then I can ask other question. When I know the answer, then I can ask other question. So there can be natural order or hierarchy among these objectives. Then objectives must be stated in their natural or hierarchical order, so that it makes sense to go from one objective to the other. Every objective must be stated clearly, and it should be possible either logically or through data analysis to achieve the stated objective. So what we should have in mind is the objective also should be achievable. Whether we achieve it or not is not known in the beginning, but it should be achievable. Why mathematical research is more difficult is because even if the objective is achievable, every researcher may not be able to achieve it. And therefore, in natural sciences, very often, even if somebody cannot achieve the objective, there can be reasons why the objective could not be achieved, which also is a lesson. In social sciences, similar thing happens. So in some areas, non-achievement of an objective also is a lesson to learn. And therefore, according to the area that we work on, we should decide whether the objective is achievable or cannot be achieved. If it is not achieved, then we should know why it is not achieved. So why it should be concrete? Because it should not be a wish list. The objective should not be like a wish, making a wish. Similarly, objective should not be vague. It should be specific, concrete. And then every objective must be verifiable. That is, if I claim that, oh, I will make you happy. Now, who will verify whether you are happy or not? So objective also must be verifiable objectively. Now, in order to carry out research, we obviously depend on data. Without data, we cannot do anything. So there is some joke that you can prove everything with statistics. You can prove anything with numbers. But what happens is, without data, you can make any claim. So in order to confirm or establish your claim, you need data. So research requires data, unless it is very theoretical. So we ignore that part. The type of data must be decided before collecting data. So before we begin getting data, collecting data, we should decide what type of data we want. So data can consist of many variables, characteristics or features. The names are different in different disciplines. For example, in computer sciences nowadays, machine learning or data sciences, they call it features. In statistics and mathematics, they call it variables. In management, they call it characteristics. So we have to first identify what variables, characteristics or features are relevant to the research objectives. So the list of variables must be prepared very carefully. Why? Because there are two possible errors. We call them errors of commission and omission. That is, we may include some variables which may not be required in our research later on. that is a little pardonable because we can ignore that information. But if we omit some variable and later on realize that, oh, that variable should have been included, then we are missing out a major part of information. And therefore this list must be prepared very carefully, because we have to make this list only once. Data can and must be collected only once before data analysis. So now this is an ethical issue. It is unethical to repeat alternate sessions of data collection and analysis. Sometimes what happens, some people collect some data, analyze it, find out what is happening, and if something good is not happening, they will collect more data conveniently. So collecting more data after analyzing available data can affect the future data collection. This is called data snooping, which is a unethical activity, and therefore we should be careful in data collection. So first make a plan, make a design, collect the data, and then begin the analysis. Even beyond that, what we'll say is there will be some research hypotheses that we want to state. So they also should be stated before looking at data, before we collect the data. Another classification of data is based on the scale of measurement. So data is a collection of values on several variables. Each variable uses a scale of measurement to determine the value. There are four major scales of measurement: nominal, ordinal, internal, and ratio. Nominal scale is the simplest scale because it only specifies distinct values. They are called labels because these values cannot be compared except for equality. That is whether two people have the same name or different names. But if I look at names of students in my class, excepting the alphabetical order, there is no other order. The standard example of nominal scale is yes, no type of questions or genders. There is only labeling, there is no order. The second level is ordinal data scale. The ordinal scale also specifies distinct values or labels, but there is an order among these values. The standard example of ordinal scale is, say, a question with 5 possible answers: strongly agree, agree, no opinion, disagree, strongly disagree. Obviously, there is some direction, there is some order among these possible answers, possible values, and therefore we call such data or such a variable ordinal variable. Third is interval scale. So interval scale consists of measurement data where measurements are numerical. Now, how do we understand whether the numerical data is on the interval scale? So the criterion is the difference between two values is meaningful. So the standard example of interval data is temperature. For example, suppose there are 3 cities, A, B, and C, and at a given time, the temperature in the city A is 10 degrees Celsius, temperature in city B is 20 degrees Celsius, and temperature in city C is 30 degrees Celsius. Then what is the meaningful statement for comparison? We say that city B is as warmer than city A as the city C is warmer than city B. We won't say that city B is twice as warm as city A, or city C is 3 times as warm as city A. So ratio is not meaningful, difference is meaningful. So we call such a scale interval scale. So most of the measurements on length, weight, height, volume, and so on are on the interval scale. Ratio scale also consists of measurement data where measurements are numerical, but a numerical comparison between two numbers is made in the form of ratio. So the standard example of ratio scale is percentage. Or another way of looking at it is, we know arithmetic mean and geometric mean. So when data is on the interval scale, then arithmetic mean is appropriate for representation of the data. On the other hand, if the data is on the geometric progression or geometric scale, that is a ratio scale, then the geometric mean is more appropriate for the data. Now, if we look at the methodology available for analysis, we find that very little literature is available, or very few methods are available for the measurements on the ratio scale. The reason for this is, if we take logarithm of the observations in the ratio scale, they come in the interval scale. And therefore, by reducing the interval ratio scale data to interval scale data, we can apply all the methods available for the interval scale data, and therefore we don't have to look at or spend time in observations which are on the ratio scale. Another classification of data is not on the basis of the way that we acquire data, the source of data. So there are three types of data according to their source. First is the primary data. So primary data is data that the researcher collects. So primary data can be field data, survey data, laboratory data, but it is like the first-hand data. Secondary data is the data that the researcher obtains from a published source that contains primary data. For example, there are many data repositories now where secondary data is available. So somebody conducts an experiment, collects data, but keeps it on the repository so I can download it and use it. Because I have not collected it, it is secondary data. Third level is the tertiary data. So tertiary data is data that is published using secondary sources of data. The standard example of tertiary data, source of data, is textbooks. Because the writer of the textbook reads some research paper and the researcher has collected or used some data, secondary data. So for the writer, it is the third hand, so tertiary. So some researchers consider tertiary data also to be secondary. So there is some dispute about these three terms. Some people say any data that is not primary, secondary. And when if we many of us may use secondary data because everyone does not have the resources to collect primary data. So some of us will use primary data. So data to be used in research must have a single source, and this source must be declared in the beginning. It is unethical to claim secondary data as primary data. When secondary data is used for research, it is necessary to declare and acknowledge the source of data. The example, as an example that I talked on, that many organizations or universities now have some data repositories that you can visit the website and download the data that you want to use to illustrate your methodology in your research. Then they only say that, okay, you take the data but acknowledge that this data has been obtained from this source. Why? Because they also know how many people are using their data sets. So acknowledgement is important as an ethical part. Data to be used in research can have variables of different types. So it is not necessary that all the data in one research is only one type of variables. There can be different types of variables, and therefore the method of analysis is also carefully selected because it depends on the type of the variable and the objective of the analysis. So on one side I have the variable type, on the other hand, how do I use it in order to achieve the objective? Because for every objective there has to be at least one variable related. Now we come to the next component, research hypothesis. Because in every research proposal, we have to state certain hypotheses as a way of deciding how do I achieve my objectives. I have to go through testing certain hypotheses. So I have to first state what hypothesis will I be testing, will I be interested in. So most of research activities have research hypotheses. So obvious question is, how are these research hypotheses formed? And then the second question is, do they have any relationship with the objectives? So let us discuss. We begin our research by stating objectives. At the end of our research, we want to establish that we have achieved every objective stated in the beginning. So on what basis do we make this claim? So this requires identifying a criterion to decide whether a particular objective has been achieved. So every objective will have some criterion of achieved. Such a criterion gives rise to a statistical hypothesis. So when I state that criterion, it becomes a hypothesis. Why? Because there is a test to verify whether this criterion has been satisfied or not. So if some objective has multiple criteria, there will be multiple hypotheses. Because in management, sometimes I find that people have an idea that if there are 5 objectives, there must be 5 hypotheses. So it is not necessarily one-to-one. Some objectives may have multiple criteria, and therefore there will be, for every criterion, there will be a hypothesis. and therefore there can be more hypotheses than the number of objectives. For example, imagine that a health science researcher begins research with the objective of developing a vaccine for the COVID-19 virus, a current issue. So what is the criterion? Should it be that when a vaccine is claimed to be the cure for this virus, 100% the patients should get cured? So the criterion of success should not be or cannot be that every COVID-19 patient is cured by the vaccine, because there will be some patients who may not find the vaccine effective. So what is the alternative, or what is the way next? A certain proportion is specified. And what is the criterion? The developed vaccine must cure at least the specified proportion of patients in order to claim that the objective has been achieved. So the hypothesis is, the statement would be like this: observed proportion of patients cured by the vaccine not smaller than the proportion specified by the criterion. So if this hypothesis is accepted, then we say that there is a good medicine. In clinical trials, typically, if a new medicine is found or developed for for a disease where some medicine is already available, then the new medicine is acceptable only if the curing rate of the new medicine is higher than the curing rate of the known medicines, old medicines. So there is a hypothesis, equality versus inequality and so on. So research hypotheses are formed in this way based on the objective and the criteria. An important point to keep in mind, as there is no distinction between research hypothesis and statistical hypothesis. Because in some books somewhere it is written that researcher is interested in the research hypothesis, not in a statistical hypothesis. Now we need a statistical procedure to test a hypothesis. That is a fact. Now what happens is, statistical procedures for testing a hypothesis have some limitation. And what is the limitation? They can only test the hypothesis of equality. Even if I want one quantity A greater than the quantity B, I can only test whether A equal to B. And if A equal to B is not accepted, then I will draw the conclusion that yes, A is greater than B. So this hypothesis of equality is known as the null hypothesis or the significance hypothesis. The word null means no difference. And therefore, statistical methodology can test null hypothesis. Therefore, we have to always convert the research hypothesis, the statement, into the null hypothesis. So what we test is the complement of what we are interested in. The substantive research hypothesis is usually negation of the statistical, that is null hypothesis. So there are two sides of the same coin. If I get heads, obviously I do not get tails. Nevertheless, a statistical testing procedure is useful. Statistical hypothesis, and the result of the research hypothesis is obtained by its negation. So if I accept the null hypothesis, I will reject the alternative, which is the research hypothesis. If the new medicine is not more effective than the old medicine, that is my null hypothesis, that the new medicine and the old medicine are equally effective, the hypothesis of equality. And therefore, if it is accepted, obviously the research interest or the objective is not achieved, developing a better medicine. Another precaution is required while stating a hypothesis. Very often we find in research hypothesis the wording that something is significantly higher, significantly lower, significantly different. So what I want to state is the word significance is a property of the sample quantity and not the population quantity. And therefore the statement of a hypothesis should not include the word significant. For example, if there is a comparison between two quantities, the hypothesis should state that there is no difference between the two quantities. It should not say that there is no significant difference between the two quantities. The significant difference is in the sample values, not in the population values. And therefore, the word significance is used only for the test of significance. That is, the sample difference significant, then only will accept that the population difference is there, exists. And therefore, sometimes we call this existential hypothesis. So earlier we used one term, evidential. Is there evidence to support your claim? If there is no evidence to support your claim, you cannot make the claim. Similarly, is any data exist? Does it exist where your claim is supported? So there can be evidential property or existential. So once we understand, we can make a list of hypotheses that we are going to test. Now, when we write those hypotheses, we may also have to go to the details of which variables will be used, what will be the criterion for testing, and so on. Those are technical matters that we'll look at in the next lecture. Then, second part is analysis and results. Because in the research proposal also, we have to state what type of analysis we'll carry out and what type of results are expected from the analysis. So research involves analysis of observed data. Analysis should be carried out in steps, and all steps must be clearly described and justified. There is no unique way of presenting results of the analysis. So what is important to know is, yes, once we get the results, the question is of how to present the results. So sometimes the results can be presented numerically if there are not many numbers. If the numbers are few, we can represent them numerically. Sometimes the results are presented in a tabular form because there are many numbers in the result. Sometimes the results are presented graphically. This makes it easy for the reader to understand the results of the analysis. For example, about this COVID-19 case, current situation. In some cases, the data is represented graphically from day to day so that we know how the number is increasing, at what rate, is it increasing faster or slower, and so on. When people talk of flattening the curve, that curve is about this graph. If we represent the number of cases cumulatively from day 1 to day now, maybe 65, 67, and so on. So graphical representation of the data is very easy to understand. Only what is the problem? It is not, even if we understand it somewhat, it's not very precise. So graphical representation of the results can be very attractive, and therefore it must be done very carefully. Why? Because a graph can be easily misunderstood if it is not drawn carefully. For example, the scales on the two axes. Sometimes what happens, there is always a common joke in management that the manager wants to show the owner that the company is doing very well. So what he does, he reduces the scale on the x-axis, inflates the scale on the y-axis. So the graph, increasing graph looks very steep. And he says, oh, see how fast we are growing. So the scales on the two axes must be very carefully made. They must be same. The size of the graph is also important. Why? Because there is no point in drawing a scatter diagram that occupies the entire page unless data is very large. Otherwise, what we can have one full page of graph and only 15 points on the graph. So it is not, there is no point in drawing such a large graph. On the other hand, it is also not very useful to draw a graph where there are 4 graphs on one page. So there is no point in fitting 4 graphs on one page when the graphs convey important results of the analysis. And therefore, even when we draw graphs for presenting the results of the analysis, we should be very careful, we should be diligent, and we should decide. So maybe sometimes we can verify, check these results, and one activity that we can carry out during research in order to understand these things is attending or presenting our papers in conferences. So when we go to a conference and make these presentations, we get some feedback. So if we get the feedback, oh, your graphs were very small, why did you cram them in one page? Or sometimes they say, oh, why did you waste so many pages? The graphs are very small. So we have to also occasionally go to conferences or prepare research papers so that we get a feedback and we get an idea about how to balance between numerical presentation of data, tabular presentation of the results, and graphical presentation of the results. So graphs are very useful in presenting results of the analysis if proper care is taken to select the right type of graph for presenting the result, every result. Why? Because graphs are available in a large variety. What are the varieties? For graphs of a single variable, bar diagrams, box plots, dot plots, histograms, they are available to present the frequency distribution of a variable. A box plot is useful in judging symmetry and locating outliers. So if a data set has some outliers, they are very easily visible or identifiable in a box plot. On the other hand, for discrete variables, a bar diagram, and for a continuous variable, a histogram is useful to visualize the symmetry, decayedness of the frequency distribution, or are there two modes, that is two suddenly high points, high frequency values, and so on. So these can also be very useful. Rather than making a frequency table, histogram is more useful because you get a visual understanding, visual interpretation. Similarly, for graphical representation of two variables, the most common method is a scatter diagram. Additionally, we can also add line graph to a scatter diagram. We can also add more lines to the scatter diagram if we want to convey some message. For example, in regression analysis, we have the independent variable on the x-axis, we have dependent variable on the y-axis, we have scatter diagram. Now on the same diagram, if we draw the regression line, then it's very visually easy to see how observations are closer to the regression line or away from the regression line. Or is there some area where observations are very much away from the regression line, because that is the area of misfit. So visualization is always useful, not only for data, but also for the results. Then interpretation of results. So results are followed by their interpretation. This interpretation must be in terms of the statement of the research problem. So we began with some problem statement, then we discussed or went in detail about the objectives that will collectively satisfy my purpose, and then using the data, I carried out some analysis in order to achieve these objectives, and I have the results. Now, therefore, my interpretation must go back and try to address the research problem. So interpretation must be in terms of the statement of the research problem. Use of statistical terms should be avoided in interpreting the results. Very often what happens in interpretation also, people say this quantity is significant, this difference is significant, this test statistic is significant. That is a statistical statement. Interpretation must be in terms of the domain area. Results of the analysis and their interpretation should be followed by conclusions relevant to the research problem and research objectives. Results are to be presented in an order consistent with the order of research objectives. So even if I have 7 objectives and I have got some results, then I should present them in the same order so that the reader can easily get an idea about objective 1. Oh yes, result 1 has answered it. Objective 2, results 2 and 3 have answered it, and so on. So we have to also be very careful about presenting and interpreting the results. Why? Every research objective will be addressed with one procedure of analysis, and result of the analysis is to be presented in the report. If some research objective requires multiple steps of analysis, then there will be one result from every procedure. In this case, there can be multiple results corresponding to one research objective. And in this case, we have to understand or keep in mind that inference is not same as the interpretation. Very often people think that statement of inference is same as the interpretation of the result. We have to remember that inference is a technical term in statistics. So in statistics, we draw inference on a parameter, whereas interpretation is about the research problem. What happened to the research problem? Have I got the answer, or have I still not got the answer? If I have got the answer, what is the confidence in that answer? So there can be 2 components in our answer. First is what is the answer, and second is what is the confidence in that answer. Because as I said earlier, even a medicine cannot cure 100% patients. The more the patients that they are cured with this medicine, higher is the confidence of the doctor. So confidence is also a component of interpretation, not inference. Inference is a technical term, and inference is a it is a statement about a population parameter for a specific variable. Interpretation is a statement that explains the meaning of the result of a statistical procedure. So when we interpret the result, we don't go into the technicality of what is the methodology, what is the test statistic, what is the hypothesis. No, interpretation, what does it mean? So this is really the knowledge that we have acquired from our experiment, from our exercise. For example, in a socioeconomic survey, the inference may be that the average per capita income of a certain community is so and so. So I can specify a number that yes, in this community, the average per capita income is so many rupees. That is inference. So inference the interpretation may be that this particular community is very poor. Why? Because interpretation has to be contextual. Inference is not contextual. So inference is objective, a matter of fact statement, whereas interpretation is contextual and therefore can be subjective. So inference is objective because it has come from data, but interpretation is subjective, and therefore the researcher has to be involved in that in order to understand it properly. Why we say that certain statements become controversial? Because two people interpret the same statement in two different ways. That is subjectivity. So we have to understand the difference between inference and interpretation, and therefore interpretation is your own creativity. What you read, how do you read the results? How do you read the inference? Is it good or bad? Does it satisfy you or does not satisfy you? That is the part of interpretation. Similarly, when we carry out research, we have to be careful about scope and limitations. Even though research objectives are aimed at a certain target population, data may represent only a part of the target population. Therefore, it is very often known as the study population or accessible population. Only this is the population that I could access. So I got a sample only from that population. So my inference cannot really apply to my target population. Initially, I wanted to target that population. So in this case, it is better to state the scope of the research in terms of the study population represented by the observed data. Similarly, it is necessary to state if the current research findings have any limitations in the form of certain assumptions or conditions. That is, we may be able to state that yes, my findings are valid only under these assumptions, only when these conditions are satisfied. So make those statements. That is where we say the scope of this research is so and so. So imagine that I am a research guide, a tourist guide. Then I have some domain. I will only guide people in only this area. That is my scope. Similar thing will happen to the scope of application of the research. Statement of limitations will make a reader aware of situations that are suitable for using results of the current research. Because very often the previous results, previous research, somebody else has carried out research, has found out some information. I may use that information in order to make decisions about, say, for example, sample size, population, sampling method. So there are many things that I decide using the information that is already available. Now, whether that information is useful for me or not will depend on whether or what are the limitations of that research. And therefore, we should also set limitations of the research that we are aware of. Finally, it is also desirable to describe possible directions of further work on the same topic. This will help future researchers in preparing their research proposals. So when we prepare our report, somebody else is going to read this report and try to develop some more research ideas, more research proposals using our research outcome. And therefore, our research outcome should become input to somebody. So from that point of view, it is also useful or desirable to describe what are the possible directions for further work, what can be done in this area, or what should not be done in this area. So we can give some guidelines. Now, final point is about technology. Because so far I have talked only about the contents of the research. Now there is something that we need to know in order to carry out some analysis of data and present our results. So technology has become pervasive, that is, nobody can avoid it, and therefore we must acquire working knowledge in two areas. One is statistical analysis, the other is typesetting. A researcher must learn at least one statistical software package and learn how graphs can be created and saved in a format that allows you to include them in your documents. So as an example, SPSS the full form is Statistical Package for Social Sciences. SPSS is popular among social science researchers. Another package, statistical package in the public domain, is R. You can see the website where you can get this R. R has many packages for statistical analysis and graphics. It is recommended to use this because it is quite popular among professionals. The second part is the typesetting. Now, typesetting is different from typing. In typesetting, you must first visualize the outcome in print form. How do I want my document to appear, and then make the material appear in that way. Now, most of us use MS Word for typing our material. So if you use MS Word for typing, then we must learn and practice inserting tables and graphs in the document. Similarly, if there is some mathematical material in our research or presentations, then we should learn and practice equation editor in MS Word in order to present mathematical material. The second option, less popular but very powerful, is a software known as LaTeX. So we can go to a site known as Comprehensive Text Archive Network, so ctan.org, Text Archive. There are many packages that typeset a document in LaTeX. For example, in Windows system, it is recommended to download and use a package known as ProText. So LaTeX has facilities for typesetting research papers and thesis also. So in the beginning, we can describe or specify the document class like article or thesis or book. What is the advantage? Book, the chapter numbers, section numbers, and so on, they are all automatic. Headings are appropriately sized and so on. So there are many facilities in LaTeX. So this presentation, for example, has been prepared using the LaTeX package called Beamer. So all these I have prepared in that package. So it makes it easy. You can see the heading of each page is blue, a particular size. The material is all centered. So there is enough space on the top, at the bottom, and at the bottom center, there is a page number out of so many. So I think I will finish for today. If you have any questions or doubts, we can decide how to communicate and get into those questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
You can stop your presentation. Okay. Requesting to Sanjay sir, please continue.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Sharad Gore, sir. You have been thoroughly guided all the participants who have been participated in this today national level seminar. You have been in your presentation shed light upon the types of research, types of data, research hypothesis, analysis and results, and so on and so forth. This will certainly boost the confidence of all the participants, and it will enhance them in writing the research paper and research thesis. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.